My grandmother's house was more than just a piece of property. It was a sanctuary of my childhood, a beautiful two-story Victorian home with a sprawling front porch. It was nestled on a quiet street in the suburbs, a place where I had spent countless summers climbing trees, chasing fireflies, and listening to my grandmother's stories. When she passed away, she left the house to me, a sacred trust and a reminder of her love. My name is Olivia, and I had no idea that my family's legacy was about to be stolen from me. For months, my husband Mark had been acting strangely. He was secretive, his phone calls were always in hushed tones, and he would get defensive whenever I brought up the topic of my grandmother's house. He would tell me that we should hold off on selling it, that he was looking into a few things, but his words felt hollow and his eyes always darted away when I looked at him. I had a feeling something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe that my husband, the man I had loved for so many years, was hiding something from me. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Eleanor, was the primary instigator of my anxieties. She would drop by unannounced, always with an air of entitlement, and always with a subtle disdain for my common ways. She would talk about my grandmother's house as if it were a burden, a problem to be solved. "You know, Olivia," she would say, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness, "that old house is a lot of work. The property taxes alone must be a nightmare. Maybe you should just sell it and get rid of the headache." I would always brush her off, assuring her that the house was not a burden but a family legacy, but she wouldn't let it go. She started bringing her friends over to look at the property, talking about how beautiful it would be if it were modernized and upgraded. She had a vision, a dream, a plan for my house, and I was not a part of it. She started to call it our family's new legacy, talking about how her son Mark would inherit it one day. It was as if my ownership of the house, my family's history, and my memories were all an inconvenience. One afternoon, I came home to find Mrs. Eleanor sitting at my dining table, a massive, official-looking document in front of her. She was talking to Mark in hushed tones, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Are you sure you have everything you need, son? Did you get the signature? Did you get it right?" My heart pounded in my chest as I walked into the room. Mark's face went pale, and he immediately tried to cover the document with his arm. He stammered, his eyes darting between me and his mother. "Honey, you're home early. We were just looking at some old documents from the house." But his words felt hollow, and his mother's glare was a dagger in my heart. She gave me a fake smile, her eyes full of a cold, menacing glee. "Just helping your husband, dear. We're talking about your future, you see, about our family's future." I looked at her, and then at my husband. And in their faces, I saw a terrible truth dawning on me. They weren't just looking at old documents. They were doing something. Something secretive. Something that would change my life forever. The document on the table, the hushed tones, the panicked look in my husband's eyes, it all clicked into place. They were trying to take my grandmother's house from me. The silence in the room was thick with unspoken tension, the air crackling with a palpable sense of guilt and deception. Mark's face was a mask of sheer terror, and Mrs. Eleanor's eyes, full of a cold, calculating glee, were fixed on me. They were a unified front, two conspirators caught in the act, and I was the unsuspecting victim. The image of the document, the hushed tones, the panicked look in my husband's eyes, it all clicked into place, and the cold, hard reality hit me like a physical blow. "What is that document, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, thick with the weight of betrayal. "What have you and your mother been doing?" Mark stammered, his eyes darting between me and his mother, his face a mix of fear and shame. "Olivia, honey, it's not what you think. It's just some paperwork for the house. We were just looking into some things." But his words felt hollow, and his mother's voice, a cruel symphony of triumph, cut through his pathetic defense. "Stop lying, son. There's no point in hiding it now. She knows." Mrs. Eleanor stood up, her chest puffed out with a sense of self-righteousness. "We were just talking about your future, Olivia, about your family's future. We've decided to put the house in my son's name. It's for the best, you see. It will make things easier for everyone. We can sell it and use the money for a business venture that will secure our future, our family's future. My blood ran cold. My family's legacy, my grandmother's sacred trust, was about to be stolen from me. I looked at Mark, his face a picture of passive cowardice, and my heart ached with a pain so deep it made it hard to breathe. "You're stealing my house?" I asked, my voice filled with a tremor of disbelief. "You and your mother are trying to steal my grandmother's house from me." Mrs. Eleanor laughed, a cold, condescending sound. "Steal? Darling, we're not stealing. We're just making a financial decision. You're too emotional to handle a property like this. A woman like you can't be trusted with so much money. It's for your own good, you see." Her words were a poison arrow. I felt a surge of nausea. The blatant disrespect, the casual dismissal of my feelings was a punch to the gut. I was not a wife. I was a rival. I was a third wheel in my own marriage, a problem to be handled. "You haven't even signed. We just needed a little help." She picked up the document and held it out to me, a cruel, triumphant glint in her eyes. "See for yourself, my dear. We have everything we need." My hands trembled as I took the document, my eyes scanning the page, searching for my signature. And there it was, in a dark, inky scrawl. My signature. But it wasn't mine. It was a cheap, clumsy forgery, a pathetic imitation of my handwriting. The lines were too shaky, the letters were too big, and it was so obviously fake it was almost laughable. The truth hit me with a force that made me dizzy. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted for years, had forged my name to steal my grandmother's house. I looked up at him, and in his eyes I saw not a husband, but a stranger. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a means to an end, a person to be used and discarded. He had sold me out for a piece of property, and he had the audacity to call it our family's future. A quiet, cold rage settled in my mind, replacing the raw anger and hurt. There was no point in arguing with them. They were a unified front, a team of two, and they were utterly without shame or remorse. My tears had dried and my fear had vanished. It was time to stop being a victim and start being a lesson. They wanted a forgery? Fine. But they were going to get a lesson they would never forget. A quiet, unsettling calm settled over me. The raw, painful emotion that had threatened to consume me was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. My hands, which had been trembling moments before, were now steady as I looked down at the forged signature on the document. It was a cheap, clumsy forgery, a pathetic imitation of my handwriting. The lines were too shaky, the letters were too big, and it was so obviously fake it was almost laughable. The truth hit me with a force that made me dizzy. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted for years, had forged my name to steal my grandmother's house. "Don't lie to me, Mark!" I screamed, my voice cracking with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "You told me it was a mistake. You told me it was an inheritance from your grandmother. You lied to me." Mrs. Eleanor laughed, a cold, condescending sound. "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. It's for your own good. You're too emotional to handle a property like this. A woman like you can't be trusted with so much money. It's for our family's future." I looked at Mark, and in his eyes I saw not a husband, but a stranger. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a means to an end, a person to be used and discarded. He had sold me out for a piece of property, and he had the audacity to call it our family's future. A quiet, cold rage settled in my mind, replacing the raw anger and hurt. There was no point in arguing with them. They were a unified front, a team of two, and they were utterly without shame. They wanted a forgery? Fine. But they were going to get a lesson they would never forget. The front door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the house like a final damning verdict. Mark and his mother stood frozen in the middle of the living room, their faces pale, their eyes wide with a look of stunned disbelief. The forged document, the damning recording, and the cool, unwavering confidence in my voice had stripped them of their power, leaving them exposed and helpless. Mark was the first to move, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. He dialed a number, his voice a panicked whisper. "Mr. Williams? Is that you? It's Mark. My wife just called you. About the house. Look, this is all a big misunderstanding." He listened for a moment, his face draining of all color. "What do you mean you're her lawyer now? What do you mean you've already filed a report? You can't just do that." He slammed the phone down, his face a furious shade of crimson. "He won't talk to me. He says he represents her now and that we have to contact a different firm." Mrs. Eleanor, who had been listening with a look of growing horror, let out a gasp. Her arrogance had been replaced by a cold, numbing dread. "This is a nightmare," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's trying to ruin us." Their fear and panic quickly turned to a desperate, furious blame game. "This is your fault," Mark screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and betrayal. "This was your idea. You were the one who told me to forge her signature. You were the one who said she'd never find out." "Don't you dare blame me," Mrs. Eleanor shrieked, her voice laced with a bitter desperation. "You are my son, and you were the one who was supposed to handle your wife. You let her walk all over you. You're the one who ruined everything." Their unified front, built on a foundation of mutual greed and a shared disdain for me, crumbled in an instant. They were no longer a team of two. They were two helpless, pathetic people, screaming at each other in the middle of a room that was no longer theirs. The lavish lifestyle they had planned, the business ventures they had dreamed of, the inheritance they thought was theirs, it was all gone. Just then, a loud, authoritative knock came from the front door. They froze, their eyes darting to the door, a shared look of terror on their faces. The knocking was firm and persistent, and a voice from the other side called out, "Police, open up." Mark's knees buckled. He looked at his mother, who had her hands clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a look of utter, complete defeat. They were caught. They had been so arrogant, so sure of their plan, so convinced of their victory, that they hadn't even considered the possibility of failure. The front door opened, and two police officers stood in the doorway, their expressions grim and professional. "Mark Thompson? Eleanor Thompson?" one of them asked, his gaze scanning the room. "We have a warrant for your arrest. You're being charged with attempted fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." Their faces, which had been contorted with rage, now fell into a mask of silent, terrifying despair. The police officers, their voices devoid of emotion, recited the charges, and the words fell on them like heavy stones. They had thought they were just taking a house, but they had also taken a chance on their freedom. The final image was of them being led out of the house in handcuffs, their lives in ruins, the lavish dreams they had woven for themselves now nothing but a distant, bitter memory. They were gone, and the house, my grandmother's house, was finally mine again. The silence in the house was no longer chilling. It was a peaceful, healing quiet. I watched from the window as the police car drove away, the flashing blue and red lights a final, dramatic punctuation mark on a chapter of my life I was desperate to close. My husband, Mark, and his mother, Mrs. Eleanor, were gone, their grand plan to steal my house and my dignity in ruins. The house, my grandmother's house, was finally mine again, a sanctuary of my childhood, a place where I felt truly safe and at ease. I walked through the empty rooms, the silence a heavy blanket over my thoughts. The furniture they had brought in, the hideous floral couch, the gaudy china cabinet, it was all gone. The house was a blank canvas, a new beginning, a place where I could start over. I walked to the window and looked out at the street, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks washing over me. The day I stood in the doorway and watched them get arrested was the day I stopped being a victim. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. It was about teaching them that I am not an ATM, I am not a person to be used, and my love and trust are not something to be taken for granted. They thought they were a family of two, a team of conspirators, but they were just two helpless, pathetic people, screaming at each other in an empty house. I renovated the house, bringing it back to life. I honored my grandmother's memory by turning her old sewing room into a studio for my art. I filled the bookshelves with my favorite books, and I planted flowers in the garden she loved so much. The house is a symbol of my new life, a place where I can be myself. a place where I am safe and free. I later found out that the police took their case seriously. They were charged with fraud, forgery, and grand larceny, and the family name, which they held so dear, was dragged through the mud. The money they had so callously stolen was used as evidence against them. They lost everything: their money, their pride, and their reputation. They thought they could get away with it, but they learned the hard way that there is always a price to pay for your actions. As for Mark, he called me, begging me to come back, promising to change. But I just hung up. The man I married was gone. Hashtag it meta pause. Seckler.05. And in his place was a stranger, a thief, and a man who chose his mother over his wife. I am no longer his wife, I am no longer a victim, and I am no longer afraid. My life is mine again, and I am free.